Okay, with that, do you want to get started, Betsy?
Sure, let's do it.
I'm turning my volume up a little. It kind of went down. Okay, so welcome everybody. I'm Stephanie Martinez, and I am one of the presenters today. We will be talking about student voice.
And I'm Betsy Lizega. I will be joining Stephanie today and sharing some information about student voice.
Great. So, Betsy, if you want to move to the next one. We do have an agenda. These are our agenda and objectives today.
Oh, it's not coming up.
Not coming up. Well, we have two. I will read them to you.
Thank you.
Participants, so that's everybody here on the call, will view examples of including student voice in each of the 10 tier 1 critical elements. So we're going to give you some examples of where you can put the use student voice within all the different tier 1 critical elements. And then the other ones is that we will review some of the new content and activities around student voice from the new tier 1 PBIS training. So I know Hans, I know the people from Pinellas have seen the new training. I know Teresa's been using that with Pinellas County, but not everybody has seen that or had access to it. So we're going to review some of the different activities that we've done to try to increase student voice, because that is one of our goals in here, is to be responsive to our students. And the best way to do that is to include student voice. So from there, we had a poll that we were going to ask. I don't know what's going on. Betsy,
Yeah.
do you want me to share my screen?
Yes, why don't you go ahead and do that, because this doesn't seem to be functioning for me.
Okay. Well,
Thank you, ma'am.
Is that the poll on elements of tier 1?
Yep.
Okay, here we go.
So we have a poll that we were going to ask, and we just want to kind of get a feel for currently, since you all are district level people and folks, what you've seen schools doing with implementing tier 1 and PBIS. So of these different elements of tier 1 PBIS, what have you seen are seeing schools implementing student voice? And then if you could give a couple of examples of that in the chat box. So we see a bunch, and you can vote for more than one. It doesn't just have to be one answer. Choose more than one. It's like voting has slowed down a little bit, and that oh, we've got some more votes coming in. A couple more seconds. Okay, so I'm going to end the poll. I hope it will show it for everybody. Your results. Okay, so you can see the results here is that some examples that we've seen so far for including student voice has been teaming, reinforcement systems, and effective procedures for discipline. Therese, did anybody share some more examples in the chat box of what that actually looks like?
They have not. Oh, actually, Hans just jumped in. Thank you, Hans.
Well, we have a whole group of 3 participants.
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to put you on the spot, sorry.
Yep. So in Pinellas, we have a number of schools that are now asking students what reinforcers they're interested in.
Awesome. And Hans, how do they do that? So we're recording this so people who are listening may be like, well, how do we ask the students? Do you know how the schools are doing that?
So I know we've had schools use like Microsoft Forms and then have the students respond at computers in their classroom, or if the kids go down to the computer lab. I've seen a middle school use those QR codes. They post them around campus, and then students would use their cell phones to scan the code and then complete a form of some sort. I think those are pretty much the 2 ways I can think of in terms of getting like as many kids across the school as possible. I know of a school that just asks a handful of kids, but that's not what we're looking for.
Correct. Awesome.
It seems to me, and this was more on expectations and rules, it seems like I'm seeing more schools get students to talk about the expectations as they're revising them. Just what do they think the expectations mean? That kind of a thing.
Okay.
And Karen included in the chat, including students who were part of a recurring problem behavior and problem solving that behavior. So I think that's a really important one too.
And I'll expand on, I've seen a high school and a middle school who've done this, where they have students who are frequently tardy to class, not when they're, being addressed for being tardy, but just at another time, they pull them and say, hey, we're just trying to figure out why we're having so many problems with tardies. Can you just tell us why you're late to class? Is it you don't have enough time for class change? Is the teacher not ready when you get there? You don't like the content? And they get them to give them some ideas about that. So that was a cool way of doing that as well, and kind of building off of what Karen shared. Okay. So a couple of examples, and we'll give a bunch more, but we just wanted to see what people are currently seeing out in the field. So this was a quote by Marcus Jackson that one of our staff members found recently, and it really kind of hit me in the heart. It's very true. So he said, the adults at the central office are meeting, the principals are meeting, the assistant principals are meeting, the counselors are meeting, and the teachers are meeting every week. However, no one meets with us and the one you're meeting about. So very good point. If we want to see changes on campus, we want to see differences in our school, we've all these other people meeting, but why are we not bringing to the table our clients, which are our students and families? And so specifically today, we'll be talking about students. So this is in the new training, and just kind of reminding people why we do this, what is the value to adding student voice into the mix. And so there's lots of ones here. I'm just going to build off a couple of them. The one third from the bottom, new ideas, viewpoints, and perspectives. We see a school campus as adults from one point of view, but our students have a definitely different viewpoint of campus than the adults do. Between the settings, between interactions between students. And we also know that sometimes our students can get better buy-in from their peers than the adults can, especially when we're thinking about middle school and high school, where they are developmentally, they're moving away from really looking to adults to looking to their peers. And so that's another way of doing it. So just a reminder about why we are doing this. And just a reminder that when we're thinking about getting voice or buy-in, there's all sorts of stakeholders. And as you see in here, students are one of those groups. And you'll notice it says all students. And so I really liked what Hans said about getting the feedback about reinforcement and what students wanted. It shouldn't be just a few students, because those few students probably represent just a few of the subgroups on campus. When we include all students, we're hitting all grade levels, we're hitting all academic levels, we're hitting all races, genders, ethnicity, students with different interests, students who are engaged in school, students who are not engaged and connected to the school, students with disabilities, students without disabilities. And so we want to make sure that we're getting the voice for all of our students. And so we're really focusing on tier 1 today. But that's not to say we shouldn't have student voice at tier 2 and tier 3. We really should. And as Karen said, system of care, which is where we have a lot of our tier 3 supports come in, says nothing about us without us. So really, just honing in on, students and all students. So again, just some different benefits about having student involvement here. For both the students and the school. And so I think a lot of times we don't think about, the benefits are for both parties. So here are the things that the students benefit from. They feel like they have the opportunity to give feedback on their policies, practices going on at their school level. Believe it or not, it also does increase engagement for the students that are participating. Betsy and I will be giving some examples from a district that we're working in. And one of the young ladies that's been participating was purposely picked to be part of this leadership team because she wasn't connected to the school and wasn't engaged. And just in one day, we saw a transformation of her from not really participating to being a leader at the end of the day. And one of the students who for her specific school was really showing leadership skills and moving forward, which goes to the leadership opportunity. But it also gives the students an opportunity to have a true voice and gives them the opportunity to say, this is what we think should be changed. And then when it does happen, they think, wow, someone listened to us. They actually did these things. So for example, one of the high schools we're working with, the students said, we don't have access to our school counselors. We have to make an appointment. It's like 2 weeks out, we can't see them. So in their cafeteria, they rotate the school counselors. And you think of the Peanuts cartoon, it says the doctor is in. Well, that's what they're doing. The counselor is in. And they rotate different counselors during lunch so the students do have immediate access to them. So those are the benefits for the students, which are some of the same benefits for the school. It really gives our school team a different perspective of the school, but it's also letting us know what is working and not working for our students. And so we can make some changes. They do give us very creative things. And it does increase sometimes that buy-in engagement for our students that aren't necessarily there. What's interesting too, when we're talking about creative solutions to school issues, we've had the opportunity to show students their school climate data. A colleague of ours is doing the same thing in another state. And what was interesting is based on the school climate data, we had some students identify here in Florida that they would like their teachers at high school to check in with them daily just to see how they're doing. And they started with a goal of 3 out of 7 teachers will check in with them daily. School across the country, middle school said the same exact thing. They just said, it's not a big deal. Just when we come in, we want them to check in and see how we're doing. So again, here is the 10 critical elements of PBIS. The ones with the stars on it are the ones we're really going to focus a lot on and have more examples as we go throughout today. You know, I could talk about this all day long, but we only have an hour, so we're having to limit ourselves. So these are the ones we're really going to hound in today for examples. And so we've done the poll. Okay, and the Jackbox. So our PBIS team, we're including students on the team. So when we think about including students on the team, there's lots of ways of doing that. So on the left-hand side, you'll see that there are some different options for what type of teams we could have. We could have a core PBIS team, and so that could look 2 different ways. It could be a core PBIS team of students, and then they have representation from that student team onto the main PBIS team, or they could be full participants of that PBIS team the whole time. That student, if you decide to do have the student PBIS team, which is separate from the core PBIS team, we've seen it different ways. We've seen it where there's a club and the students have that as a PBIS club. We've also seen it as an elective course. And so with this elective course that we've seen, they use it as what they call leadership. And leadership usually means like student government, elected people in that course. But with this leadership course, it is meant around PBIS. So it's not voted on like with student council. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. And then focus groups. And so we've done some of that too, is getting a good representation of students from the school campus and spending time in focus groups. And those focus groups could be 1 hour, just talking about one topic. So I know one of the counties did that recently with Brooke, where they were going to do some focus groups just around reinforcement systems, let's just say, all the way up to doing a full day focus group around one specific topic. It could be around PBIS, it could be around school climate data. So there's a variety of ways of doing that. Now, regardless of the way that that is done, we just want to make sure the way that we identify students to participate on that PBIS team is representative of the school campus and that the students want to participate. So there's lots of ways of doing it. Students can volunteer to be on it. Teachers can nominate students and then students can elect to be on it or not. We've seen some application processes. So students have to apply to be in the elective course, and then they have to get a teacher or two to sponsor them to agree with their participation. Regardless of that, when we get the self-nomination teacher or application process, we just want to make sure that the final students that we're including are representative of our school. And so you can see there's a slew there. But we just want to make sure that we're hearing from a group of students who are representative of our campus. And even bigger than that, at some point, we'd like to hear as much as possible from all students on campus. And so Hans brought up that great example earlier about QR codes. That's a great thing. We've seen that elective course where the students came up with questions. They put QR codes on campus. Every person that is a student in that student body had the opportunity to answer those questions. And then the elective course downloaded those responses into an Excel spreadsheet and sorted the answers and then shared the data back with the PBIS team so that it was representative of the whole campus. So this is just out of Kentucky. They brought students together to talk about incidents recently that have been going on in society and to get feedback and some changes that they could make on campus. So up at the top is the YouTube link. If you want to watch that a little bit later. It's a great little video that was done. They were using the focus group format to get that feedback.
Mm-hmm.
So expectations and rules. So one of the suggestions and strategies for getting feedback from students is called the personal matrix. And so here's the example of that. Here is the link for it. It is one of the appendix in the culturally responsive field guide. And this, we provide what the school-wide expectations are to the students. And then the students have the opportunity to describe what those school-wide expectations look like at home, at school, with friends. I've also seen it with an additional column added, and they add things like community events. So you could put if you have a rec center nearby, or, you know, the kids go to the mall a lot, whatever that may be. There's also been a research study that was published about the effects of doing this personal matrix with students. An example of this that I've seen too is out in California. There is a high school and they did this with their students. And what happened was they did it once and then that was it. A couple of years later, when they were showing the matrix to the students again, the students brought up to the school, like, we weren't involved in this. We weren't part of it. And it really dawned on them that the students at all who left and graduated or were gone were the ones that had developed the current matrix. So they, at a minimum, every 4 years, go through and redo this as a school-wide activity. So all grade levels are involved in the development for that personal matrix. And so they do that every couple of years just to keep up with the times and keep up with the students that are currently enrolled in the school. And so I shared that with some high schools recently here. And so some of them are starting to do that as well. Some other things that we did is we did an activity called representative student, very similar to the ideal student that we used to do in the tier 1 training. So we told the students, what would a student who represents your specific school look like, sound like, feel like? And so these were the different things that they came up with. Once they had a master list, then the kids got to vote and then narrow it down. So that's one example on the left. And then you can see a different example of a different school on the right. And what's interesting is what we had them do is after they listed the characteristics of a representative student, then the students grouped them and then came up with keywords. And so their self-awareness, leadership were some of the ones that they did. Now, to introduce this to the students and what we meant by a representative student, we had our own Dr. Heather George, her high school daughter, come up with a video. Now, I'll be honest, I don't really understand it. The kids loved it. They thought it was really spot on, and that's all that matters. She said her daughter was dancing, then it had just a bunch of words pop up that were a representative student. This is when first TikTok came out. They loved it. Then what we had the students do is they came up with a list of the settings on campus that they thought were problematic. And so they made a master list of it. And you can see these are 2 different schools. So what they did is they came up, they made a master list. And then what we did is those dots, I call them garage sale dots. Each student got 3 dots and they got to vote on the 3 areas that they saw as most problematic on campus. And then from there, they got to define what were the specific problems in those settings. And then from there, we came up with rules to address those. So you can see, actually this one was from the same school. They said stairwell was one of the biggest areas. And after having conversations with them, it was actually just really one specific stairwell. But these were the things that were taking place. They came up with a recommendation for these rules for the stairwell. They also came up with a recommendation of moving a staff member to be at the top of the stairs to kind of supervise that setting to keep people moving. Because what was happening is the kids were clogging the stairs and just hanging out. Those who were trying to get up and down could not. They said, if there was an adult there keeping them, telling them to keep moving, it would probably eliminate some of that. So the school staff had to talk about finding an adult to stand in that stairwell to help with supervision.
Yeah, I thought this particular activity was really interesting too. They were mentioning like locker rooms as being an area that was not well supervised, that had a lot of, kind of devious things going on that maybe they weren't even getting referrals for, but it was a great way to bring that to the attention of administrators, that these were areas that they probably needed to have more supervision in.
Yeah, and that was it was interesting when it was not the classroom. A lot of it was the students were coming up with, we just need supervision.
Yeah.
We've got adults supervising, some of these behaviors will decrease. Then another thing that we really want to think about is really how do we get our students involved in teaching those expectations and rules. So here are some different videos. Not sure if they'll work. We haven't had great work with technology today, but here are some different ones that had student involvement.
Bathrooms may look the same, but we want to remind you of our expectations as we begin to reopen CMS for in-person instruction. The biggest thing we can tell you is please respect each other's space and keep yourself at least 6 feet apart. Minimize the amount.
And then this is an oldie but goodie that you probably have seen before too. And this one, I'm just going to show part of it. But what's really nice about this cafeteria or class transition dismissal procedures is that the students are involved in modeling the behaviors that you want to see. And just a reminder here that, this is the steps we say for explicit instruction for teaching our social emotional behavior skills. And we really do want to try to get students involved as much as possible in practicing these skills. So going back to like the personal matrix, having the students define what those skills look like, having the students model and demonstrate the skills when we're teaching the expectations and rules, having them model and practice and demonstrate the examples and non-examples. I know some schools get a little weary about having elementary school students doing the non-examples. And I understand that. And so I've seen some really good examples of the adults doing the non-examples. But then again, just having the opportunity for students to be involved in the development and rolling of these lessons out and getting feedback from our students on them. So here's just some ideas. We showed several different videos to our high school students in the focus group and got some feedback from them about what they liked and didn't like from some of the videos. And some suggestions for what should be done for teaching those expectations and rules. They gave us some feedback about frequency on them. I thought it was interesting that they said that should be on Fridays or Mondays. I just thought it was interesting Friday, but maybe first thing in the morning to remind the kids to make it through the day, and then Monday to start the week. And so we had them talk about what they liked, that they didn't like, and what they would recommend for the videos. Now, the other thing that we did that was interesting is we asked, one of the things that really came out when we were working with the students, this was not a planned activity, was they said that they felt there needed to be an increase in empathy of the adults on campus for what the students were going through, and being a little bit more flexible with things like deadlines for assignments, or if you're late one time, or, a variety of different things. So this discussion came out. So as a result of that discussion, we showed them the Under the Surface video. And it was really interesting. The kids, these were high school students, loved the video. They, at the end, said, "Miss, we need to show this video to everyone on campus, because we've been talking about having empathy for us, but we hadn't talked about having empathy for staff. And this really made us aware that we need to have empathy for staff too. So our students need to understand, we're going through things, but we don't think about what the teachers are going through. So they felt it was really important to show it. So we did ask the students, would it be better to show this pre-developed under the surface video, or would it be better to make one specific to their school? And overwhelming majority said to do this pre-packaged one, not a school specific one, because then they said it could get in people's business too much. And people could use it against people. And so they didn't want to go that route, which I thought was really a good valid point. We then also asked the students, how did you personally learn about the expectations and rules? So when you came on campus, you freshman the first time, or you transferred in as 10th grade, what were the different ways that you learned about those expectations and rules on campus? And, a lot of it was not formal instruction that we heard from consistent across the campus. A lot of it was kind of trial and error. They got in trouble and then they learned it. A couple did say that they had specific teachers that covered things in specific classes, but not all of their teachers. And then some of them said that they did have an assembly they went to. But, with that assembly, some of them said, well, I wasn't here for that assembly, so I never got it. Some of them that said, well, we were handed a handbook. But, I know a lot of staff don't read the student code of conduct. And if we don't read it, how do we expect our students to actually read it? So it was just interesting. Some of the other ones that kind of stood out to me is they said that they learned the rules and expectations from older siblings and friends that had been on the campus. So not a lot of formal instruction, and they gave us some recommendations for some more formal instruction. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Betsy.
Awesome. Thank you, Stephanie. And so I'm going to go over the rewards kind of recognition piece. I personally think this is probably like the easiest point of entry if you're starting to think about how to incorporate student voice. In fact, when we did the chat at the beginning, folks were saying that this is something that they already do with their students. We know that there's nobody better to tell us what they value than the students themselves. So we're going to kind of give you some tools and strategies for incorporating your student voice into your rewards program. We have a handout that's in the chat box. I think Therese linked it for us. And it was developed as part of our Tier 1 training, where your team compiles a list of all of the strategies that you use on campus. And it allows you to kind of identify which strategies you have, which ones are being used with fidelity. One really good piece is it talks about, are all students able to access this? And what's the perceived value of this reward strategy? Is this even something that's worth doing? The second part of that activity, after you've completed it and figured out what rewards you have to offer, is that, sorry, next slide. And if you click one more time, nope. Yeah, there we go. It will show you kind of a list of questions that you can ask to really dig deeply into how well that reward system is working for you. Once you have that information, then you're ready to really dig into what your stakeholders think about your reward strategies. So you can go on to the next slide. And this one is a activity where you start thinking about from your compiled list of strategies, asking staff, students, and families about what they think about the methods that you're using. And this is just a nice tool. It's in the chat box just to help you kind of keep track in a strategic way of how you're going to share this information and get feedback from stakeholders. Next slide. So when you're working with your students, and talking about reinforcement, this is one of the best ways we have to really look at the fidelity or the effectiveness of something. We can definitely look at disciplinary infractions and things like that, but our students are going to tell us in a very real, concrete way what's working, what's not, what they believe we should use. And so we want to ask them questions about what they want, And I think it was Hans talked about, doing a reinforcement inventory at schools, and possibly using something like the QR codes around the building, to identify the things that students would like to earn or to have as reinforcement. And so those QR codes are really great for some of our older students. Younger students, we might have things like collection box, suggestion boxes, or bulletin boards, polls that they take in their classroom. We can also do things like social media posts as a way to collect some of those responses. And the next slide. So when we talk to our high school students about suggestions for rewards, you can see how many words are on these slides. They had lots of ideas. There were definitely no shortages of ideas for things that they'd like to earn. And surprisingly, a lot of the items that they said were low or no cost kinds of things, like earning extra credit, maybe having extra time in certain preferred areas, or being able to choose music in their classroom. So you can see, and then some of them, what I thought was really nice was that getting a phone call home for something positive was one that earned a lot of those garage sale stickers. People really thought that was a great idea, as well as having a place at their school that was sort of like a chill zone. Lots of people thought that was a good idea. And I actually think that the school may have started to implement something. I think if that was the one that I'm thinking about. Not sure if you remember, Stephanie, but I kind of remember them talking.
It was interesting. It was interesting too, when we did these focus groups, the students, we did have one representative from the school who sat in during the day, but they were meant to be an observer to hear what the students were saying, to take it back to the PBIS team. And also if there's any questions, because we're not that familiar with the school, that they could answer those questions. And she did tell us that at the end of the day, that was an idea that the PBIS team had already come up with, but they weren't sure if the students would like it or not. And she was pretty excited, because then she was able to take this back to the team and say, okay, we are on the right path. This is what the students want. And they were working on it.
Awesome. And you can go on to the next slide. So in thinking about our discipline procedures, I know you remember that slide at the beginning with the boy and that quote. Students are the most deeply impacted by our school discipline practices, but they really don't have that much of an opportunity to provide input on those practices. So using your students in this capacity is going to help to give them a voice and really learn, a little bit more about what could possibly be effective, and maybe some of the things that are causing harm. So one thing that we have is a resource that's a student and family engagement inventory. And so you'll find this in your handouts. And this is a way that teams can help to ensure that we're engaging in meaningful communication with all of our stakeholders, including students, by coming up with different means of communication, not just always relying on the same approaches. And so you'll see that there's quite a number of approaches and places where you can list the types of activities you're currently working on. So it's a nice way to start to expand the way we think about getting that engagement. Next slide. So when we're thinking about our discipline practices, and I know that we've done this in our new Tier 1 training, where we start to ask for stakeholder feedback about our definitions of some of the behaviors that are typically our disciplinary infractions. So for instance, this idea of disrespect, consider having students provide feedback on how they define that term, and see if they think that, which behaviors do they think should be handled in the classroom, and which ones do they think should be handled in the office. Not to say that that's going to dictate how our policies run, but I think it's really important for us to understand how they're viewing these terms that we frequently use to define their behaviors. We might not fully agree with their perspectives, but we might be surprised by some of the feedback that we get. Going on to the next one. So in addition to that feedback about the defining features, you can also, ask for different feedback about how we should handle the behaviors. Which behaviors do they think warrant a call home? Which ones do they think that teachers should handle? Which ones do they think that admin should handle? I think these are really important perspectives for us to get from students. And on the next slide, we asked our high school students that we had with us about some of these policies. And many of the students had really strong opinions about specific things. One being dress code, of course, and cell phone policies, feeling like those were not fair. And I just want to say in this particular district and at this particular school, they had a very strict cell phone policy where they weren't allowed to use them. And the dress code was a uniform. So in terms of the dress code, the students felt like, it was too rigid. They lacked self-expression. They felt like uniforms were uncomfortable. So those were some of the opinions that they expressed. And then in terms of the tardy policy, they had some opinions about that as well. The tardy policy they felt was maybe too punitive, and that there were times where they felt like the transition to get from class to class was very lengthy, and that resulted in them receiving referrals, or there were things beyond their control that would make them tardy, like traffic or things like that. So just some ideas that they shared about some of those policies. And they also looked at the pros and cons for some of those things. And they did have some pros for the cell phone policy. They did feel like it would make them more focused and give them less distraction. But they had some good reasons too why they thought it shouldn't be as rigid as it was. And then in terms of the tardies, the kids cited some reasons that kids might be late for school, but they also shared their opinions about which discipline decisions they felt like would be most effective. And they gave some good ideas for consequences that they felt could change behavior. One of the ones that Stephanie and I were both very impressed by was there were a lot of students that felt like a phone call home was a really, really serious game changer. Like you can suspend me, you can give me ISS, but please don't call my house. So I don't think we realized.
And it was interesting.
Go ahead.
And it was interesting too, because they said it wasn't just calling the house, it was calling a specific person. So you had to find out who that person was in the family. So some of it said, it's not my mom or dad, it's my uncle, it's my brother. It's knowing who that person is, that they have a good relationship, that they don't want that negative phone call home for. The other thing, which was really funny too, this particular school, we did have the continuum of students. So we had several who had been in trouble multiple times on campus. And so one of them was like, you can't do anything. There's nothing the office can do to change my behavior and make me want to make good choices. I'm like, okay. So we wrote nothing on there. And then one of his buddies said, man, I don't want you coming to my house and doing a home visit. And the one who said nothing's like, man, shut up. Don't tell them that. Like, okay.
Giving away the secret.
Giving away the secret. So it was really it was funny. We laughed and we giggled about it. So it was fun.
And so for the next slide, this is about evaluation and implementation planning. And so this is really a kind of a deeper level of student involvement in your PBIS framework. And Stephanie and I have been working this year with the district in some of the high schools where we're doing quarterly meetings with the same cohort of students from schools. And we're having them look a little bit more deeply at things that involve behind the scenes pieces of PBIS and school implementation, and really looking at discipline data and behavior data in a way that informs that PBIS implementation plan. On the next slide, we've been examining some of those school policies and data and having the students share their feedback. And the students are also providing that feedback and those ideas to the administrators and their PBIS teams at their school. And they're giving us some ideas about, how to make changes and shifts based on how they're interpreting and seeing the data. And on the next slide. So if you are planning to include students as collaborators in your implementation planning, you would want to organize your data and gather feedback about the topic that you're going to address. So for us, we had students looking at disciplinary data and looking at climate data to share their interpretations and their ideas of how things are going. Then you're going to want to make this like a cyclical process where after you've given them the data, you've kind of solidified those questions, you gather their feedback, and you present that feedback to the stakeholders on your campus that are responsible for making those shifts and changes. And we're going to continue to do that with these students and show them how things are changing over time. So they're not just contributing one idea one time, but they're really kind of now part of that planning process that that happens over and over again. And so the next thing we've got is a little snapshot of our students. And this is them in that first session where they started looking at their school climate data. I think most or all of them said they had never seen this data before, but they had remembered filling it out. And this is a little image of what that data looks like. So some of the things that it captured. This was in Osceola, and they have this very rich climate survey that gives lots of different pieces of information for the students. And they just looked at their particular schools. So looking at whether or not things like cultural awareness and action had increased or decreased, what their diversity and inclusion looked like, what their expectations looked like. And the kids were pretty good at taking a look and examining this data. They had an adult with them from the school who helped to keep them on focus and identify the things that stood out to them or were most concerning to them. And so from that data, okay.
I was going to say two things that really, so these are the big domains, and then there were sub questions. And two of the things that the students really liked besides sub questions was seeing whether their growth was an increase or decrease from the previous year.
Yeah.
And their printouts actually had the district average. So they like to see how they compared to the district average. Were they above or below it? They really were intrigued by that.
Yeah, and it was very similar to what we see, when we look at data as adults, we like to kind of see how we're doing in comparison to others as well. And on the right-hand side, you can see where they looked at some of those things that they were most concerned about. And so some of those were student behaviors like tardy, skipping, fighting, social emotional self-control, and then teacher-student relationships was another one that came up over and over again. And so from their climate data, they first kind of brainstormed multiple themes. And then from there, they started to look for those top themes from that data. And some of the ones that we saw, again, engaging instruction, relationships with staff, making sure there was that mutual respect. A big one was also, and Stephanie touched on this earlier, access to school counselors, understanding how to access them, and making sure that we could get them in a timely way. And actually in our next meeting with the students, we're going to have somebody who's a district level school counselor come in and talk to them about what school counselors do and maybe problem solve a little about that particular item. They also talked about meeting mental health and social emotional needs. And then from this information, we want to go on to the next slide. At the conclusion of their first, I'm not sure if you can hear me. At the conclusion of their first session, the students, and you can see some of them right here, they were working on developing what we call a path, which is basically a long and a short-term goal, and it provides all the detailed steps to achieve that goal. So the who, what, where, and when, and each of the schools kind of illustrated this and created their poster. And the plan was for these students to then present this information back to their administrators, what they created, and start to develop a real concrete plan for executing the things that they put on that path. And I'm not sure if the video will show. I really hope it will, but it has a little bit of the students presenting their path to the group. I don't even see a picture. At least you might be able to hear it.
So our goal is basically we want to like have our school more engaged with each other. So by doing that, we're gonna better advertising our school events, clubs, and our sports, just like everything that our school does better, so that our students can actually get involved with the school. Because that's the main problem that's with our school, is that our students and teachers aren't really connected with each other. They kind of just go to school because they have to.
Steps we have in mind is club approval. We already have one club in mind for us, like either us as examples or to get more students from student government or other places. So just basically go around school and like start conversations to make people feel more comfortable in our school to be a proud dog. To admin, create teacher mentorship. Basically, we're teachers that we think or the students think that are like the best examples as teachers. To have other teachers go in their classroom.
So the students articulated pretty well what they laid out in their plans during that first session. We're meeting with them again just in a few weeks, and we're going to take it a little step further now that they've all gotten to know each other, and we're going to really dive into some of that more social emotional content, and how they can access counselors and look a little bit more at their data that has to do with mental health. And from our first round, we asked them to provide us with one word that expressed how they felt at the end of the day. So this was a list of the words that they used to express how they felt. And I just was so moved by this. The bigger the word, the more often it was said on the sticky notes. And I have high schoolers, so anytime my own child can come away feeling any of these things from something they do at school, that would really just move me. So I really liked that they had such a great feeling about the day that they had. They also, I think Stephanie tells a great story about there's one boy who wasn't on his phone the whole day, and he was so surprised that it was the first day he hadn't been on his cell phone all day at school. Do you remember that, Stephanie?
Yeah. So there's two things. So he was really funny. He said to his adult, because as Betsy said, they had an adult with them. At the end of the day, he said something along the lines of, "Man, my phone's been blowing up all day. I got to see what's going on. I missed out on something." And she said, "Well, when you're engaged in school, that's what should be happening. You shouldn't be on your phone all day long." So it just kind of reiterated to them, if they're engaged in opportunities to respond, then they won't be on their phone because they're really engaged in what they're doing. And then one girl, I remember in particular, she put tired as her word. And she said, "I'm not tired because of you or what we did today." She's like, "I think I'm brain tired. I put so much energy and effort in today. I'm just wiped out. I am tired after the end of today." So it wasn't a bad thing that she was tired, but it was actually a very positive thing.
Yeah. And then at the end, we had them sharing ideas about how they were going to send feedback back to administrators. And so they had some ideas that they generated for different things that they could do to get that information back to administrators on a regular basis. Similar to the way we were surveying kids about what they wanted for reinforcement, but maybe QR codes that take them to surveys, Dropbox for feedback. And also they had different rooms within their, how you have your online grading system that shows assignments and things like that, having rooms for study skills and social skills and things like that. So that was it so far in a nutshell, but I really feel like it's definitely a worthwhile cause to invest in. listening to our students and getting, they have some great ideas for sharing with us that could really help to improve your system. So I hope you guys enjoyed today's session and learned something.
I'm going to plug two things real quick, and then we'll open it up if anybody has questions. But Therese had put in a Teach by Design article that came out from PBIS Apps recently that was all about student voice. The other thing that I will plug is that the PBIS forum that was virtual this last year, all the presentations are online right now, and there's a lot on student voice. So if you want to hear some more, there is even a compilation video of students that's in there that was showcased at the conference during the keynote. So just a couple other additional resources, just want to kind of plug in there if you're interested in more student voice. So with that, any questions? And since we do have a small group, feel free to unmute yourself. If you would prefer
Oh, yes,
to do that.
please. And thank you guys for filling out the poll.
Yeah, Stephanie, this is Therese. I just wanted to reiterate, I totally agree with you on the student voice videos from the forum. Let me see if we can hunt down the link and get that added to the chat box, because they are definitely worth listening to.
And Karen agrees that they were amazing.
Okay, I've got the link here overall for the forum videos or forum recordings.
Awesome. Thank you, Therese.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, those were great. Does anyone have any questions or any thoughts, anything they want to share? Okay, well, we can stick around for a few minutes. And other than that, I hope you guys enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you, Hans. Yes, these were from 2021. This was the last conference. Thanks, Karen.